So, well, a guy who's as cool with her cologne as Michael Jackson, guys. You know that, right?
Yeah.
So we're gonna cover Thriller, an album you may have heard of. I'm just gonna play a hunch right there. In the opening montage, you heard "Beat It," a song you probably have heard of, and now you're gonna run the numbers. I could tell you it's number one in terms of all-time sales, so I'll run that number for you.
There you go. So Michael Jackson's Thriller comes in at number 10 in the 1980s on Best Ever Albums, number 1 in 1982, number 81 of all time, and it's, of course, Michael Jackson's highest-rated album on Best Ever Albums. It also made Rolling Stone's list, coming in at number 12.
All right, well, I mean, let's start with the numbers in terms of the scope of this album, right? I mean, besides the fact that this is the album that took Michael Jackson from superstar to, like, massive genre bending, first true black pop star for all, America, like the crossover to everything, world superstar, right? That was what this album was. But let's talk about some of kind of the ridiculous stats. First of all, I thought it was amazing. It cost $750,000 to record this album, which was considered an incredibly large amount in 1982. I can't even imagine how much that got earned back, but I can also see how they probably were skeptical of spending that back then, because you just didn't do that. It spent 37 non-consecutive weeks at number 1 on the album chart. It had 7 singles that reached the top 10 on the Billboard Hot 100. For just reference,
like almost
Girl
the
Is
entire
Mine.
album.
So Girl Is Mine, Billie Jean, Beat It, Want to Be Starting Something, Human Nature, PYT, and Thriller were all there.
Yeah, there were 9 songs on the album, so only 2 didn't make that. Yeah.
This album was released on November 30th, 1982. By the end of 1983, it had sold 32 million copies worldwide. So that, in case you're wondering, that was 13 months that it sold 32 million albums.
Jeez.
So, to give you an idea. Yep. It became the first album to ever become the best-selling album in the United States for 2 different years, which it did for 1983 and 1984. This isn't even getting into the fact that it won 8 Grammy Awards at the 84 Grammy Awards. It won Record of the Year and Album of the Year. It swept the American Music Awards. It's in the Grammy Hall of Fame and the National Recording Registry of Albums. And we haven't even talked about the music videos, which, of course, Billie Jean, Beat It, and Thriller are all probably massive in the inner sanctuary of well-known albums ever, not just in the 80s, but ever. All 3 of those are huge. Many guest shots on this album. The members of Toto are prominently featured as studio musicians on this. As many, we've talked about Toto. They became a band of studio musicians. It was kind of like if the Wrecking Crew just became a band, right? That sold a ton of albums. Eddie Van Halen plays on Beat It. I think a lot of people know that. Quincy Jones was the producer of this album. Of course, Paul McCartney is on The Girl Is Mine. And so there are people just all over this. Here's the origin of this album. We covered Off the Wall in 1979. And it was a critical and commercial success. It sold 10 million copies. But Michael Jackson, I guess at the time this would have been part of the origin story, but now it's impossible to think about Michael Jackson without him thinking that it wasn't big enough, right? Like he felt like that was not successful enough. It's just only 10 million copies. Like my goal is to be the biggest musician, a pop artist in the world, right? That was kind of like what his vision was. And he gave an interview where it's like the most Michael Jackson interview in the world, where he said, afterwards he because he after Off the Wall he recorded the last Jackson 5 album, I should mention, but he said after that he was deeply unhappy. He said, even at home I'm lonely. I sit in my room sometimes and cry. It's so hard to make friends. I sometimes walk around the neighborhood at night just hoping to find someone to talk to, but I just end up coming home, which is like the most Michael Jackson quote ever when you think about it, right? It's kind of there. So he hires John Branca as his manager in August of 1979, and he's pretty vocal in the research I did about the fact that he felt he was not valued by the music industry. It's brought up quite a bit, where a story that comes up a lot is that Rolling Stone was thinking about running a story on him, but they decide not to because he claims he was told that black people on the cover of magazines don't sell copies. And he said that was a big impetus of him wanting to sort of prove that wrong. I think so. His mission statement for this album was that he wanted every song to be a killer. He said he listened to a lot of albums that would have like one good song and not a lot of other ones, and his take was, well, why can't every song be a hit song? And that was his goal for this album, and I think pretty much he met his goal, I would say. Yeah. The other thing about this was that in looking back retrospectively, a lot of people mentioned that this was a very interesting album thematically, which it is. It's a very paranoid album lyrically, which it is when you listen to it. Like Billie Jean, Beat It, these are Thriller, right? These are all songs. Even The Girl Is Mine is a little bit like defensive, right? Along the world, human nature. And that he does mention that, you know, paranoia and sort of like sadness are themes that kind of run through this. And if you listen to the lyrics, it is the truth. I talked before about the fact that it cost $750,000 to make. That would be $1.9 million in 2017 money, I found. The recording started on April 14th, 1982. They worked on 30 different songs during that time, 9 of which were included on the album. Many others end up on, you know, odds and ends here and there, and some of them have never been released. Jackson and Jones had an interesting relationship. At one point, they fought with each other, and they were wondering if they could finish the album. Michael Jackson would kind of get creatively frustrated, and then he would just sort of rehearse dance steps by himself alone. That was kind of how he dealt with it. And a lot of the songs were considered to be true stories. Like, for example, Billie Jean was about his own experience with obsessed fans. I don't think the pregnancy storyline was necessarily his, but it was it's kind of like a lot of these songs were loosely built. He loved horror movies. And a guy I didn't mention, but who's on here is Vincent Price, of course, is on that. So that's another huge one. He started doing sort of African-inspired stuff with Wannabe Startin' Something that becomes something that shows up more. There's a lot of stuff that starts to show elements of the Michael Jackson that we would know later, right? You know, kind of the funk meets pop meets immaculate production meets bombastic, over the top sort of showmanship, but with that sort of paranoia and dark theme at times, which when you think about Michael Jackson's music, it is a theme of it a lot when you think about it. You know, even the next album, like Smooth Criminal and Bad and, things like that, I do have a little bit of ominousness. And I want to talk about that a little bit when we get in there. But as you might imagine, this album was, besides selling well, was well received by critics who kind of said this basically represents the next level of pop. How old do you think Michael Jackson was when he recorded this album, guys?
23.
I'll say 24.
He was 24 years old when he was recording this, and 25 when it was in the heart of what was happening, which is pretty amazing to think about. That, you know, he seems like such a fully formed product, but he's still a very, very young man at this point. Well, so,
he's been performing since he was little.
There are literally 1,000 other things related to this album. I could go into like how each of the music videos, what a big deal they were, how it kind of took MTV to the next level, as well as pop music radio, how it sort of is in many ways the peak of the record buying period of American music ever. It's sold over 70 million copies worldwide to this point in time, which is incredible. I mean,
does that include digital sales, do you think?
I don't know. I will go so far as to say there will never be an album that sells that many copies ever in the history of music, because just unless somehow we regress back to that format. I mean, that represents the peak. Right. I can go to Logic. I'm going to kind of leave there because we will be talking about Michael Jackson again down the road. I think, Josh, you get to start. This is a tough one to talk about because I can't imagine that you guys both aren't intimately familiar with this album. So take your angle, Josh, and we'll build from there.
So this, personally, this is like technically probably the first album I was ever exposed to. My mom always tells the story about of her playing the record in the living room and me dancing around as a toddler to it over and over again. So, this is in, pre age 5 era. So it's been around my whole life, and it is endemic. I mean, there's so many. I've heard Thriller and seen the video for Thriller, probably hundreds of times at some point, along with Beat It and Billie Jean being the other huge 3 songs on this album. So it's hard to not like the album, because it's so in the popular culture at this point. And as we've said, this album is like phenomenal from a listenability standpoint, because almost all of the songs are amazing on it and just like so catchy and fun to listen to. And despite hearing some of these songs so many times, they're still good. Like Thriller is probably the only one that I could probably take a break from listening to.
Oh, there's another one I could as well, but
Okay.
Continue. Yeah.
But I like Beat It still. I like Billie Jean still. And the other songs that you don't hear as much, even though they had 7 singles, the rest of the album is solid overall. What I did this time listening to it, since, we're trying to come from a more critical perspective, is listen to what's going on in the background of these songs and kind of appreciate the fusion of all these different things that, like you mentioned, with the African beats. I definitely noticed that, and Want to Be Starting Something, the funk and R&B fusions and song like Baby Be Mine, which I'm surprised that was not a single, because that was also a really catchy song listening to it.
Yeah.
Just put the whole album as a single out. And his smooth voice works really well in companion with Paul McCartney on The Girl Is Mine. That's kind of it's a silly song, but it's also kind of fun, and I appreciate, Paul McCartney being a Beatle and kind of a modern pop, the starter of modern pop, working with Michael and kind of the next generation of pop. Thriller has so many, from a kind of a film perspective, I always know about how massive it was as a video, how MTV has played it, got so many requests to play it. They would just play it like, multiple times an hour on MTV, and there's a whole making of documentary with John Landis being the director of the Thriller video, and kind of the effects on that video kind of being groundbreaking at the time, or at least in the conversation with like American Werewolf in London and some other films, in terms of the transition that he makes into the beast or the animal or whatever it is. And then obviously the whole dancing video of the zombies, that how that's been imitated over and over by, was it like prison people in East Asia or something like that too, that video of all the inmates doing the giant one. But so it's kind of Thriller, the point being Thriller is kind of its own separate thing. But I always enjoy Vincent Price. I think he adds a nice element to it as well. I still really enjoy Beat It. The guitar backbeat on that. Toto, I think they played on Beat It in a lot of these songs. Their guitar work is phenomenal on that. And obviously I love Eddie Van Halen's guitar solo on that too. And then the back half of the album is Beat It. What's this? I didn't look to see when the side stars. Beat It, the second, the opening track on the second side.
It is.
Beat It
Side
starts the
one's
second side.
Want to Be Starting Something to Thriller, and
that
side
makes
2's
sense.
Beat It to Lady in My Life. Yeah.
Yes, and the back half is just as strong. And I would say when he goes into the slow ballad movements, I didn't like Human Nature as much, and I think Lady Is Mine is by far the weakest song on the album. But then
Wait, The Lady in My Life or The Girl Is Mine?
Lady in My Life, sorry.
Got it. Okay.
The last song on the album. But PYT is also great. So it has, PYT does a lot of weird...
Written by James Ingram, by the way, the soul
Interesting.
singer. Yeah,
Okay.
I thought that was interesting, yeah.
PYT has this great funk backing, and then they do the really weird like synth voice in the spirit of Peter Frampton, although it's like different. You can hear it say PYT. And did you guys notice in Billy in Baby Be Mine where it like slows down at one point, where it's like almost an audio defect? It's like they slowed the tape down. It was something I noticed this time. And it's a very small moment, but it also like changes the tenor of the song for the rest of the part. I don't know if it was intentional or not. I mean, it must have been intentional, but go back and listen to that and see if you hear what I heard on that. I thought that was really interesting. But I mean, it's hard not to like this album. I think if you don't like this album, you're just being intentionally contrarian, and or I guess, to be fair, if you have a problem with Michael Jackson now, I can totally understand how you can't listen to his music anymore. But I mean, at the time, there's a reason this has sold millions of copies. He like Will Smith made with the intention of being the most having every song be a hit. That was kind of Will Smith's ethos when he began his career in film and making movies. And he looked at all the top 10 best-selling movies, and he said, "Oh, I'll just make a sci-fi movie. I'll make an action movie. I'll make this, this, and this," and that's how he became kind of the number one movie star in the world. So I think there's parallels there. But I like this album. It's been a while since I've listened to it in total, so that was fun, but no bad things to say about it.
Yeah, along those same lines there, Josh, in terms of albums that were created just like as many singles as possible.
Yeah.
Def Leppard's Hysteria turns 35 today. So, yeah. So, and I'll be seeing them on Saturday. I'm going to go see the Def Leppard, Poison, Motley Crue, and Joan Jett show in Fenway on Saturday night. So there you go. Also, just to point out, going back to the sales, this has, according to Wikipedia, on the list of the best albums ever sold, this has 70 million claimed sales. Number 2 is the Eagles' greatest hits at 44. Wow. So it's not even close. You know what I mean? It's like when Babe Ruth hit 60 home runs and the next guy hit like 20. You know, it's like it's just so far and above what everybody else is doing in terms of album sales. So, yeah, there's not a whole lot of bad things to say about this record. It's in many ways, for me, it is the 80s. I mean, this is one of my earliest musical memories is Michael Jackson's videos from this album, just the songs. You know, I believe my brother had this on tape. I never owned a copy of this, but I certainly heard it many times. Was really familiar with the songs. I still think the 1-2 punch of Beat It and Billie Jean opening the second half, those are my two favorite Michael Jackson songs. It's just, they're like perfect pop songs. Beat It's just like a great, you know, just not even the guitars. Yes, the guitar's great in there, but what really makes that is the beat and the bass line kind of underneath it that's just driving that's carrying the actual song, and then you got the other stuff layered on top of it. Is just, it still gets me. You know, all these years later, it still it as John say, it hits it. Well, it doesn't hit me in my man parts, but it definitely it resonates with me on a different level. You know, just like it's like I'm feeling that, but it's just it's hard to deny that. I also think this has one of the all-time best opening tracks of all time, "Wanna Be Starting Something." If you guys might have remembered, that's just it's 6 minutes long, but man, that could keep going long, you know. And they're breaking down the "Mama Say, Mama Sa, Mamaku Sa," and they're doing that over and over again with the hand claps, and it's just like, yeah, you can just keep doing that because it's just so it's so great, it's so energetic, and it's so fun. It was the song that I had play at the entrance of my wedding party at the wedding, if you guys remember that. But I was like, that's the song I want played when we're starting the party.
I do want to give Josh a shout out, by the way, for making my name Mama Say, Mama Sa, Maku John this week on our clean feed. So shout out there. Yep.
Oh, there you go. And what am I? I'm Paul McCartney's forever lover. So thank you, Josh. Yes, I saw that a little while ago. So
I thought that was such a funny line in that song. It was so silly.
Well, and while we're talking about that, okay, so if I'm gonna complain, I'm gonna complain with "The Girl Is Mine." I actually will say this. I used to feel, I remember having this conversation actually in a former podcast that I had with my friends Pat and Kevin, talking about this record, and I remember saying, I hate that song. It's so stupid, it's schmaltzy, and I made the comment like, if you're going to be like a greatest album of all time, you can't have duds in the album. And I still feel that way, right? If you're going to be a great album, I'm sorry, you can't have a bad song. If there's one miscue, it ceases to be a great album. Now, I'm going to backtrack on. This is still a great album. I think Rolling Stone's got it a little. I think the best ever albums ranking is a little bit better than the Rolling Stone ranking. I think I think 12's a bit high. And I will say, "The Girl Is Mine's a schmaltzy song," and especially when they get at the end, he's like, "Paul, you know I'm a lover, not a fighter."
Right.
Like, I just get, what are you doing? That is just such an unnecessary. And I know they're goofing around. Actually, side bit. I don't know if you saw this, John, but I did read somewhere that Michael Jackson started writing this song while he was hanging out with Paul McCartney watching cartoons, is what it was said. So I was like,
I'll have things to say about that song in my piece.
what? Like, so I will say this. I listen to it now and I try to be a little bit more fair. And I don't, the song itself musically, I think I'm okay with. I think I can get down with it. It's just the back and forth there. For someone probably on this podcast that can probably deal with schmaltzy definitely more than John. I would probably guess I could probably deal with it more than Josh as well. That's even too much for me. So The Girl Is Mine, Lady in My Life, like the ballads on here. I'm okay with Human Nature. That's probably more of a ballad as well. But I think that there's, I don't know, musically there's a little bit more interesting things going on there, and I like the chorus there. It's not one of the stronger songs by any stretch, but it's still decent. I agree with you, Josh. I think Baby Be Mine is a sleeper on this album. I think that would probably, maybe have warranted. That might have warranted a single. I mean, oddly enough, that when you look at here, the releasing of the singles, "The Girl Is Mine" was the first single released on this. So who the hell is the record guy going, hey, of all these songs,
the dude who's like, hey, we have Paul McCartney and Michael Jackson on the same track.
But
that's the guy.
But it's just, But anyway, so that's what they lead off with. But when you've got, just the Beat It, and Billie Jean that's got some great moments on it. Beat It and Billie Jean, my favorite. Wanna Be Starting Something's a close third. Thriller, I think historically I'd always look at that and say, well, that's a good song, but that song is always more about the video to me. The video is a movie, right? It's like an actual, and I remember being terrified of that. I saw that when he turned into the werewolf guy. I was terrified, right? And I couldn't watch that video for a couple of years after that. I was probably like 5 when I saw it for the first time. But listening to it this time around, it's certainly shorter. I mean, it's almost 6 minutes long. But when you watch the video, they do the chorus over and over again. I don't think the chorus is great. I think the verses are a little bit better than the chorus for me. So I like that it's cut back a little bit here, and I was getting more into that. And I was like, no, that's still a really good song, right? And PYT is a great, kind of quasi disco, upbeat song that kind of, I don't really think about a whole lot when I think of Michael Jackson, but having it on here is that's a nice upbeat way to kind of transition after Human Nature. So yeah, what can you say? It's a fantastic album. It's groundbreaking. It does so many different things. He's the king of pop here. There's a couple of duds on it for me still, so I can't be like, oh, this is one of the, in a vacuum, it's not one of the greatest albums of all time for me personally, but there's a lot more context with this record that definitely catapults it there. And I think of an album of this stature, I think it's still okay to have a couple of duds and still be revered as it is. I'm not going to certainly say, well, you can't, forget about Thriller because of The Girl Is Mine. I'm not saying that, but it would be nice if the ballads were a little bit more. I don't know. I'm sure Paul McCartney and Michael Jackson could have done a better song than The Girl Is Mine, but they were having fun.
You mean like Ebony and Ivory?
Sure. But I mean, this is what you get after watching cartoons for, it's like, oh, just doing something goofy. So whatever, I'll give them some latitude. But yeah, man, God, I still go back to Beat It and Billy. Great songs. Never get old, only get better. Want to Be Starting Something. Those perfect songs. So yeah, thumbs up for me, of course.
Oh, you guys both went way longer than I'm gonna go. In the sense of this is such a clear album. I mean, this is the pop album, right? I don't know if this is a hot. It's not the pop album. I'll start by saying that it's an easy thumbs up, right? But I look at this album more. There was a great quote, actually a great quote when I was researching this that Robert Christgau had. He said, "The '80s were when stars replaced artists as bearers of significance. When art is intellectual property, image and aura subsume aesthetic substance, whatever exactly that is. When art is capital, sales interface with aesthetic quality. Thriller's numbers are part of its experience," which I thought was because it is. It's impossible to grasp Thriller without thinking of the bigness of Thriller. And so like what I'm going to try to do is deconstruct like what I feel about it as an album, which is almost the most ridiculous thing to do to Thriller because like it doesn't exist as, you know, it exists as Thriller, right? Like this vehicle. But here's what I would say. I would say that Thriller has some songs that are upper tier pop singles in the history of pop music. We're talking Billie Jean, we're talking Beat It, we're talking PYT. Those 3 songs right off the bat. We're talking about a ballad that I think is about as good a ballad as you can do in terms of like Quiet Stormy ballad for the mainstream, like in Human Nature. And then you have a song in Wanna Be Startin' Something that's sort of Michael Jackson. I think it's his like artistic statement on this and sort of like a attempt to at least get to some roots, you know what I mean, along the way. I have never been a big fan of the song Thriller, I'll be honest with you. The Girl Is Mine is I think a bad song. I actively dislike it, and it's why it can't be in my you can't have and then, you know, the track, the album Closer, I don't think is super strong either. I don't want to sound like contrarian, though, because at no point did I ever not realize that I was listening to a great pop album, like great pop album, right? And a monumentally important pop album. But like as an album, right, compared to other artistic albums, I think that it is simply if you strip it of its numbers and the time, which is kind of hilarious because you don't have the next 40 years of I mean, Usher, Justin Timberlake, you know, all these people, you know, it's Bruno Mars. I mean, all of these people, you know, this is what they aped, and they became the next generations of pop. Yep. You know what I mean? And even just in R&B and stuff. So I'm totally aware of that effect. I'm trying to look at it just as a divorced from context pop album. I look at it as a very much above average pop album in terms of the songs. And I would say, though, that I like this album in totality equally as much as I liked Off the Wall. I think the highs on Thriller are impossible to not recognize, right? And they go higher than Off the Wall. But I don't know if there is this chasm artistically, you know, between the two albums in the way you'd think there would be based on it, if that makes sense.
Fair. I mean, I remember really liking Off the Wall. And it's always been a good go-to album.
And I think what makes this album so incredible is that it's the perfect album at the perfect time. Yeah. It was when we were getting better at somewhat. I'll start by saying very much somewhat. We were open to the idea, as in pop radio, you know what I mean, of bringing in black artists. MTV was there to be built. I mean, you had Quincy Jones come in, who was the perfect producer at the right time for this. You had Michael Jackson at exactly the moment where he was trying to establish himself and his ambition along the way. There just were a lot of things that clicked time-wise that I think took this from just the remarkable album that it is to like an all-timer. And it just went to show me, like, certain things have to hit at the perfect time. And as good, for example, as like Elvis or the Beatles and some of these things were, they were also, you know what I mean? They just happened to, by both their presence, but also the fact that the landscape was open to it, right? They came in and they were who moved it to the next era of pop music. And that's what this is. This is Michael Jackson pretty much writing what pop music should sound like for probably as much as up to maybe 10 years ago. I think he owed the next 30 years. It's really only like the last 10 years where it started kind of moving away from that sound as the dominant sound, and maybe it's replaced by that like Max Martin-y sound probably was what replaced the Michael Jackson sound. I'd say that's probably what did it. So, but yeah, easy thumbs up. And I mean, and the highs are. I thought it was interesting. I read that Michael Jackson never performed the song PYT live, which I thought was interesting.
That's unfortunate.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and you guys, when I said James Ingram wrote it, you guys know who James Ingram is, right? The soul singer.
I
Probably
don't.
most well known for I Don't Have the Heart. I don't know if you guys know that song. No.
No, maybe if I heard it.
I don't have the heart to love you. No, doesn't do anything. Okay, yeah, that was his. It was like a number one song, I think. But anyway, yeah, thumbs up.
And it's interesting too. Like I didn't think Michael Jackson. I didn't really think about. Did Michael Jackson write any of these songs? I wasn't sure. And then when I looked, I was like, geez, he did. He wrote Beat It, Billie Jean, and Wanna Be Start. My three favorite songs.
Girl Is Mine.
Wrote all of it.
Girl
And then
Is
he wrote
Mine,
The
too.
Girl Is Mine, which is probably my least favorite. So he
that's
also.
crazy.
But that's the other thing too. I mean, comparing this to Off the Wall, I think that's kind of one of the things that sticks out with me with this because, like you said, John, the highs are really high, and then there's a couple of clunkers, and just like the difference between like a song like "Beat It" and "The Girl Is Mine" musically to me is just like it's like an almost like night and day, So it's and I don't know if I remember Off the Wall having anything that kind of hit as low as maybe that did.
No, I would say the highs were higher here, but the lows were definitely lower too.
Yeah, mm-hmm. Right.
Yeah,
but I mean, impossible to talk about music without talking about this album. It's in the first 5 albums. If you were an alien, you would listen to for American popular music, and it's not even in question.
Yep. Yeah. Not much more to say. Production is top notch. I noticed that.
Yep.
Off the top, Quincy Jones definitely deserves credit on this album.
Oh, did you find out about the tiger on the cover, John?
Yeah.
Oh, did I about the
Tell me
tiger?
the
Yeah, let me
story.
see if I can find my notes right here. The tiger. It says that the cover for Thriller. It's so he's in a suit that belonged to the photographer, a guy by the name of Dick Zimmerman. Okay.
Okay.
And it reveals a tiger cub at Jackson's leg. I don't believe that it was his. But it was kept away from his face because Michael Jackson was paranoid that the tiger was going to scratch him in the face.
Yeah.
So that was what I felt. I didn't see whose tiger it was, though, Matt. So
Okay.
yeah,
Tiger
Mike Tyson's.
unknown.
Mike Tyson.
Yeah.
Did Mike Tyson have a tiger?
he did have a tiger, and I'm pretty sure probably Michael Jackson did at Neverland Ranch as well.
Yeah.
Would be my guess because he had Bubbles, the
Yeah,
chimp. So
that's right.
Probably a tiger floating around there somewhere. So. But yeah, I mean, it's Michael Jackson, man, and it's like, as I said, it's impossible to tell the story of popular music without Michael Jackson.
And we're not done with Michael Jackson. We're going to cover 1987's
Dangerous.
Bad.
And Dangerous too.
We're covering Dangerous too?
Mm-hmm. Yep. Mm-hmm.
Okay. So yeah, we got a couple more Michael Jacksons to...
So we get some Smooth Criminal, huh?
Yeah, that's on Bad.
Yeah, that's on date.
Nice.
Oh, it's on Bad,
It's on
yes.
Bad.
Right.
Mhm. It's on Bad. So
Not the
all right.
Alien Ant Farm version, Josh.
No, that one's good too, though, to be fair.
I do like that one.
Moonwalker.
All right.
Do you guys like that video game? Do you remember that movie?
I
video
do.
game?
I
that's
think
right.
It
Yeah.
doesn't age super well because you have to go around saving children. So yeah, I did. What I remember about that is they had it at we used to play. I was on a soccer team. We used to play at an indoor soccer facility, and we would play that game all the time. And what I remember is 2 things. Number one, like every time he would do it, it would be like, ow! Like he just each time was there. And then there was a thing where you could hit the magic button or whatever, and everybody danced and then died.
Yeah.
Yeah. And Bubbles was involved at one point, that you could put Bubbles on your shoulders, right? And just so it was.
He also had a...
the move was like you kicked out the leg, right? And it
Yes.
put sparkle
Yeah.
dust. Yeah.
And then I think he spin too, maybe.
Yes, yeah. And through the hat. Yeah,
Through your
something
hat,
like that.
yes, yeah. He also had a 3D movie in Epcot Center
Captain
called
EO.
Captain EO. That's right.
Yeah,
Yep.
I've been on that ride a few
Yep.
times.
They don't have that anymore.
No.
No, and I will say that I thought that there were some tracks on the History album in the mid-'90s that are underappreciated. There were some pretty good songs on that. There
that
was
the one
also
where he
some
did the
bizarre
Janet-
songs, but yeah.
What was the song he did with Janet Jackson in the video? They were like in a
That one
spaceship
had
or whatever.
Scream.
Oh,
And
yeah.
then you had You Are
Scream,
Not
yeah.
Alone was on that. You had Earth Song was on that, which was a pretty big hit.
And then the
there
Free
was a-
Willy song was that on, or was that
No,
just on the soundtrack?
that was on Free Willy soundtrack. The sleeper on that one. There's a song called "Stranger in Moscow," which is actually a really good deep cut
Yeah.
for Michael Jackson.
More
So,
paranoia.
yes, that one. Yeah, that album was him at his I remember there's a song about like a guy like Dom Shelton or something, and the whole song's just him going like, Dom Shelton is a cold man, and you're like, what is going? This is like too inside baseball, you know, and you're like, that's kind of when you realize that it's kind of spilling over, you know. So, but yeah,
Amazing.
Anyway, Matt, would you like? We have a cold listen hot take next week, don't we?
We do.
We do.
Yep. Very cold listen.
So for God's sakes, Matt, share.
We're
What are we doing?
going back to the past here because we're still in 1981 on the cold listens. This is our